Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to your first set of recordings for biochemistry. Today we'll be starting with the physical properties of water. And here are the learning outcomes. You'll see at the beginning of each series of recordings, I will give you the learning outcomes for the slides. Apologies, the grass is being cut outside of my window right now on campus. So these learning outcomes are going to tell you what to focus on as you take your handwritten notes. Today's three learning outcomes are: first, recognize the different types of intermolecular forces or supramolecular interactions that occur in water and determine the relative strength of each. 2, describe how Coulomb's law applies to biological molecules in aqueous solution. Predict the relative force between two charged molecules or an ion dipole arrangement. And finally, synthesize your understanding of Gibbs free energy with the hydrophobic effect. Describe why entropy is the important factor. As we go through our lectures over the course of this semester, you'll also see that I have a Meet a Scientist moment at the beginning of the slides. This is to introduce you to the various scientists and the various types of science being done out there related to biochemistry. So first up this semester is Neri Kim. She is a professor at Seoul National University. She is of Korean descent. She works in Korea and lives in South Korea. And her work is interesting because she studies RNA and proteins that bind RNA. And she looks at how both RNA and the proteins that bind RNA regulate processes within cells. Give me a couple of months and we'll be talking about regulation of pathways within cells, so things to look forward to. Let's get started. Why should we care about water in the first place as biochemists? Turns out water is pretty important. It will kind of govern the structure and function of biological molecules. It is the solvent in all biochemical reactions, right? We are made of water. We are 70% water as humans. And this class focuses on human biochemistry. Finally, as you will see later this semester, it is also the reactant in biochemical reactions. In many cases, of course, not all cases. What are some things that we should know about water? Well, of course, it is a polar protic solvent. That should mean something to all of us coming out of organic chemistry. The polar part matters for biochem, so does the protic part. So what does polar mean? If we look at this molecule of water here on the right hand side of my screen, you'll see that we have oxygen and two hydrogens. We should understand that due to the electronegativity difference of oxygen versus hydrogen, we can draw this dipole moment across the molecule. And this tells us that the molecule has a partially positive end and a partially negative end. So this is what we mean by polar, contains electronic poles. Protic, what does protic mean? Well, water has an oxygen and two hydrogens, right? So it is able to donate protons. So it has the ability to gain or lose a proton, and we will see that for sure in the coming months. You might remember something about polar protic solvents from organic chemistry. You might know something about what things are soluble in it. You might know something about potential nucleophiles in this type of solution. And so just keep those kind of in the back of your mind. They'll be relevant later in this course. What else should we come into this class already knowing about water? Well, water is a little bit special because of the types of intermolecular forces, or IMFs, it can do. It makes very strong hydrogen bonds, and it makes a lot of them, okay? So here on the right I have a diagram showing you kind of a hydrogen bond between two water molecules. Just based on something that chemists know about bond distances, we would expect the hydrogen bond interaction to be about 2.6 angstroms. But the actual hydrogen bond interaction is 1.8 angstroms, so it's short. That short distance makes it very strong, especially due to the electronegativity difference between that oxygen and that hydrogen. We have those poles interacting very well. Water is also pretty cool because it can perform 4 hydrogen bonds at a time, right? We have 1, 2 lone pairs that can be hydrogen bond acceptors, and 1, 2 hydrogens that can be the hydrogen bond donors. What do we know about the solubility of molecules in water? Well, we should understand that polar or ionic things should be soluble, and you've practiced things like this, I do believe, in your organic chemistry labs. We should assume that nonpolar things do not dissolve, are not soluble in water. We'll talk about that later. And there's a new word that we'll practice later on this semester called amphiphilic. Amphiphilic molecules have both polar and nonpolar parts, and we'll wait to see how they are soluble in water. Finally, folks, let's talk a little bit for this video about the way that hydrogen bonds are formed. To see the full titles of slides, folks, just know that you can always download them straight from TopAct, because I can tell that I'm cutting off part of this slide. So, in an ideal arrangement, such as we see in ice, water can form 4 bonds. And you can see kind of in this 3-dimensional diagram that, for example, the water molecules are perfectly arranged to make a hydrogen bond from both lone pairs and each hydrogen. And so ice has the perfect arrangement where each hydrogen where each water molecule has a complete hydrogen bond at every possible point. It's a little bit different when ice melts into liquid water. So in liquid water, we have collapse of that beautiful tetrahedral hydrogen bonding orientation because that water is rolling around in constant motion, right? So we can understand that the hydrogen bonds are constantly being broken and reformed, constantly breaking and forming hydrogen bonds. And this is pretty much energy neutral, because we can understand that if a hydrogen bond is broken, it's most likely reformed with that water that's right next to it also rolling around. And so water will perform fewer hydrogen bonds per molecule, right around 3. In this class, you'll see me draw hydrogen bonding interactions, and I cannot draw 3-dimensionally, so I'll show you kind of how I like to draw them myself. So here's my water molecule with my 2 lone pairs, as well as its 2 hydrogens. Now I will draw a hydrogen bonding arrangement between this hydrogen and the next thing that it's going to perform that interaction with, which would be the lone pair. And I could do the same thing for the next water molecule. For example, like this, always demonstrating that the interaction is happening between the hydrogen and a lone pair on the oxygen. Up next, we'll talk more about interactions in water.